May 1945. The war in Europe was over, but one German fortress commander refused to surrender. Surrounded by Patton's Third Army, facing overwhelming force, he sent a message that would have intimidated most commanders. "I will never surrender. You'll have to kill me and every man under my command." It was a defiant challenge rooted in old-world military honor, a demand for respect between warriors. Patton read the message, looked up at his staff officers, and what he said next perfectly captured everything about his character, his understanding of war, and his absolute refusal to play by anyone else's rules. This is that story. The fortress was Pilsen, in what is now the Czech Republic. In May 1945, it represented one of the last pockets of organized German resistance in Europe. Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. The Wehrmacht was collapsing across Europe. But in Pilsen, a German general named Georg von Majewski commanded approximately 30,000 troops, many of them battle-hardened SS units who had retreated from the Eastern Front. They had fortified the city, preparing for a final stand. General George S. Patton's Third Army had been racing across Czechoslovakia, liberating towns and accepting the surrender of German units by the thousands. Prague lay ahead, tantalizingly close. Stalin had already claimed it as part of the Soviet sphere, but Patton believed he could reach it first, potentially changing the post-war map of Europe. Standing between Patton and Prague was Pilsen and General von Majewski. Von Majewski was old-school Prussian military aristocracy. He had served in the German army since before World War I. He believed in the code of the officer class, in military honor, in the traditions that separated professional soldiers from common soldiers. To him, surrender without a fight was dishonorable. His men had fought from Moscow to Czechoslovakia. They deserved better than to simply lay down their arms without ceremony or acknowledgment. On May 5, 1945, Patton's forces surrounded Pilsen. American artillery was positioned to level the city. Tank divisions were ready to attack from multiple directions. Fighter bombers circled overhead. The tactical situation was hopeless for the Germans. Any reasonable commander would surrender. Von Majewski wasn't being reasonable. He was being defiant. Patton sent a standard surrender demand. "Lay down your arms. Cease resistance. Your men will be treated according to the Geneva Convention." Von Majewski's reply came back within hours. The German general acknowledged his tactical situation, but refused to surrender unconditionally. He demanded that his forces be allowed to surrender with full military honors, that his officers be allowed to retain their sidearms, that his men be treated as honorable soldiers, not criminals. And then came the line that would define the confrontation. "If these terms are not acceptable, then you will have to kill me and every man under my command. We will not surrender dishonorably." Patton's staff officers were divided on how to respond. Some argued for immediate attack. The Germans were surrounded, outgunned, and had no chance of victory. American lives could be lost assaulting prepared defensive positions, but the battle would be short and decisive. Others argued for negotiation. The war was effectively over. Was it worth American casualties to force a surrender when the Germans might be convinced to lay down arms peacefully? There was also the political dimension. Eisenhower had ordered Patton not to advance toward Prague, bowing to Soviet demands. Patton had pushed the boundaries of those orders by advancing as far as Pilsen. A prolonged siege or bloody battle would give Eisenhower an excuse to relieve him of command. But simply accepting German terms would set a precedent that other holdouts might exploit. Patton himself understood the situation with perfect clarity. Von Majewski wasn't actually defying military reality. He was negotiating for honor. The German general knew he couldn't win. What he wanted was acknowledgment, respect, the ability to tell himself and his men that they had fought honorably to the end and surrendered on terms that preserved their dignity. It was theater, military tradition, the elaborate dance of professional soldiers who valued ceremony and protocol. Most commanders would have played along. They would have negotiated terms that looked like concessions but meant nothing, allowed the Germans to save face while actually surrendering unconditionally. Some face-saving ceremony, some formal acknowledgment of German military prowess, and everyone could go home satisfied that honor had been preserved. But Patton wasn't most commanders. He had spent the entire war fighting a certain type of professional military mindset that valued tradition and honor over victory. He had clashed with British commanders who wanted to plan every operation meticulously. He had argued with Eisenhower about strategy. He had violated orders when he thought those orders were stupid. And now, facing a German general who wanted to play the honor game, Patton was about to demonstrate exactly what he thought of military tradition when it conflicted with reality. Patton called his staff together to discuss the German surrender demand. His officers presented the various options: negotiate, attack, wait, refer the decision to higher command. Patton listened to each argument, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, walked to the window overlooking Pilsen, and turned back to face his staff. "Gentlemen," he said, "let me make this very simple. That German son of a bitch thinks we're playing some kind of game where everyone follows rules and shows respect for military tradition. He thinks because he's been a soldier for 30 years, because he wears fancy medals and comes from some Prussian family, that we owe him something. He's wrong." Patton's response to von Majewski was direct, brutal, and perfectly in character. He dictated a message that would be delivered to the German commander within the hour. The exact wording has been disputed by historians, with several versions existing in various memoirs and historical accounts. But the substance was unmistakable and devastating. The core message was simple. You have 2 hours to surrender unconditionally. If you do not, I will level Pilsen. Every building will be destroyed. Every defensive position will be obliterated. Your men will die for nothing. There will be no honor, no ceremony, no recognition of your military tradition. You will simply die, buried in rubble, forgotten. The choice is yours. But Patton didn't stop there. According to multiple accounts, his message continued with a section that perfectly captured his contempt for the kind of military posturing von Majewski represented. He reportedly wrote, "You say I'll have to kill you? Fine, that's easy. I've killed better men than you. You think dying for a lost cause is honorable? I think it's stupid. Your war is over. You lost. Whether you die today or surrender today changes nothing except how many of your men die with you." The message concluded with a deadline and a promise. You have until 1700 hours. After that, my artillery will open fire and won't stop until Pilsen is rubble. I won't lose a single American soldier taking your fortress. I'll just destroy it from a distance with you inside it. Your choice. Live and go home eventually, or die pointlessly right now. Patton's staff officers were shocked by the bluntness of the message. Some worried it might provoke the Germans into a suicidal last stand. Others pointed out that destroying Pilsen would kill thousands of Czech civilians still trapped in the city. Patton dismissed these concerns. The message, he argued, wasn't really about destroying Pilsen. It was about calling von Majewski's bluff. That German general thinks he's playing poker with military tradition as the stakes, Patton explained. He's betting that we value tradition enough to negotiate, to give him his ceremony and his honor. I'm showing him we don't give a damn about his honor. We just want him to surrender so we can go home. Once he understands we're not playing his game, he'll fold. Patton understood something crucial about the military mindset of officers like von Majewski. These men valued honor and tradition precisely because it gave meaning to their service. They needed to believe that military service was noble, that there were rules that separated them from common thugs, that losing honorably was better than winning dishonorably. Patton's message attacked that entire worldview. It said, "There is no honor in losing, there is no nobility in pointless death, and your traditions mean nothing to me." The message was delivered to von Majewski at 1500 hours, giving him exactly 2 hours to decide. American artillery crews prepared to fire. Tank commanders positioned their vehicles for assault. Infantry units readied for the possibility of having to clear rubble if the Germans forced the issue. Czech civilians, hearing rumors of an impending bombardment, fled the city center in panic. Inside Pilsen, von Majewski faced his moment of truth. He could stand on principle, force Patton to follow through on his threat, and die with his men in the ruins of a city defending— what, exactly? The Reich was gone. Hitler was dead. There was nothing left to defend except abstract concepts like honor and tradition. Or he could surrender, save his men's lives, and accept that the old world of military ceremony and aristocratic officer codes had died with Nazi Germany. At 16:45 hours, 15 minutes before Patton's deadline, a German staff car emerged from Pilsen flying a white flag. Von Majewski had blinked. The German general sent word that he would surrender, but he still tried to negotiate terms. He wanted assurances about treatment of his men, about retention of personal effects, about formal surrender ceremonies. Patton's response was even more direct than his first message. Unconditional surrender in the next 10 minutes, or I start shooting. No negotiation, no discussion. Surrender or die. At 16:55 hours, 5 minutes before the deadline, von Majewski formally surrendered. 30,000 German troops laid down their arms. There was no ceremony, no formal presentation of swords, no acknowledgment of German military prowess. The Germans marched out of Pilsen, were disarmed by American soldiers, and were processed as prisoners of war with the same efficiency as any other captured enemy force. Von Majewski, who had demanded to be treated as an honorable opponent worthy of respect, found himself standing in a muddy field with thousands of other German POWs waiting to be transported to detention camps. Patton visited the POW processing center the next day. According to witnesses, he walked past von Majewski without acknowledging him, as if the German general was just another face in a crowd of defeated enemies. It was the ultimate insult to a man who had spent his career believing that rank and military tradition commanded respect. To Patton, von Majewski was nobody special, just another German officer who had fought for the wrong side and lost. The incident perfectly encapsulated Patton's philosophy of warfare. He had no patience for military romanticism, for the notion that war was a gentleman's game with rules and ceremonies. He believed war was about killing the enemy as efficiently as possible and going home. Honor, tradition, respect between professional soldiers. These were luxuries that had no place on the battlefield. The only thing that mattered was victory, and victory meant making the enemy quit fighting. This attitude had made Patton both celebrated and controversial throughout the war. He had clashed with British commanders who wanted to plan operations according to traditional military principles. He had violated orders when those orders conflicted with his instinct for aggressive action. He had slapped soldiers he considered cowards, earning a reprimand that nearly ended his career. He had made inflammatory statements about the Soviets that caused diplomatic incidents. Throughout it all, Patton remained convinced that his approach, aggressive, uncompromising, focused solely on victory, was the correct one. The confrontation with von Majewski also revealed something about the clash of military cultures in World War II. This cognitive dissonance allowed them to fight for a monstrous regime while maintaining their self-image as honorable men. Patton refused to acknowledge that self-image. Granting them the ceremony and recognition they craved would validate their worldview, would suggest that there was something noble about their service to Nazi Germany. Patton's blunt refusal to play that game was both personally characteristic and politically significant. It said, "You don't get to lose a war fighting for Hitler, and then demand to be treated with honor and respect." The Czech civilians liberated when Pilsen surrendered certainly appreciated Patton's approach. Patton's willingness to threaten complete destruction of the city if necessary, while certainly controversial, had ended the standoff quickly and with minimal casualties. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through both American and German forces. For American troops, it became another Patton legend, proof that old blood and guts didn't back down from anyone. For German forces considering last stands elsewhere, it sent a clear message. American commanders, at least Patton, wouldn't negotiate for your surrender. You either quit or died. There would be no middle ground. The Pilsen confrontation became one of many stories about Patton that illustrated his unique approach to military command. Unlike the carefully curated image of other famous generals who wanted to be seen as strategic geniuses or caring father figures to their men, Patton's image was built on aggression, directness, and absolute refusal to compromise. He was old blood and guts, the general who wanted to fight, who drove his men hard, who had no patience for weakness or hesitation. But the story also reveals something more nuanced about Patton's character. He wasn't simply a brute who solved every problem with force. His response to von Majewski was calculated psychological warfare. He understood that the German general valued honor and tradition above life itself, and he used that knowledge to force a surrender without firing a shot. By threatening to destroy Pilsen and denying von Majewski any recognition or ceremony, Patton removed the only reason the German had to keep fighting. It was brutally effective psychology. This same psychological insight had characterized Patton's entire campaign across Europe. He understood that the German army in late 1944 and early 1945 was psychologically broken, held together only by fear of Soviet revenge and residual military discipline. Patton's rapid advances didn't just capture territory, they destroyed German morale by demonstrating that resistance was futile. Every town that surrendered without a fight encouraged the next town to do the same. The speed of Patton's advance became a psychological weapon as effective as his tanks and artillery. The Pilsen incident also highlighted the tension between Patton and his superiors that characterized his entire career. Eisenhower had ordered him not to advance toward Prague, but Patton had pushed as far as Pilsen, technically following orders while actually positioning himself to potentially violate them. The confrontation with von Majewski risked escalating into a battle that would give Eisenhower grounds to relieve Patton. That Patton resolved it through psychological pressure rather than actual combat was probably the only reason he didn't face disciplinary action. After the war, Patton's aggressive approach and his refusal to acknowledge German military honor would contribute to his downfall. He made controversial statements suggesting that former Nazi Party members should be allowed to serve in German Reconstruction government. He compared Nazi Party membership to being a Democrat or Republican in America. These statements, combined with his aggressive anti-Soviet rhetoric, led to his relief from command in October 1945. Patton died in December 1945 from injuries sustained in a car accident, never returning to America. The confrontation with von Majewski represents a specific moment, but illustrates broader truths about Patton's approach to warfare and military tradition. He believed that war was about winning, period. Everything else, ceremony, tradition, honor, respect, was secondary at best and dangerous distraction at worst. This made him an extraordinarily effective combat commander, but a poor choice for occupation duty or diplomatic roles. Modern military historians debate Patton's legacy constantly. Some see him as the perfect aggressive commander, the kind of general needed to break through enemy defenses and exploit success. Others argue that his aggressive approach wasted lives, that his violations of orders created problems for overall strategy, that his political tone deafness made him a liability. The truth, as usual, is complex. What isn't debatable is that Patton's response to von Majewski's challenge was perfectly in character and highly effective. When faced with a German general demanding honor and respect, Patton said, essentially, no, surrender or die. Choose now. It wasn't diplomatic. It wasn't traditional. It wasn't the kind of response taught in military academies where officers learn about honor and protocol. But it worked. Von Majewski survived the war, was processed through POW camps, and eventually returned to Germany. He never received the honorable surrender ceremony he wanted. His military career which had spanned decades and 2 world wars, ended not with recognition of his service, but with Patton's contemptuous dismissal of everything he valued. Whether that was just or cruel depends on your perspective, but it was unmistakably Patton. Direct, brutal, effective, and completely uninterested in anyone's opinion about his methods. In the end, Patton's response to, "You'll have to kill me," was simple. "Fine. Your choice. Decide in 2 hours." It was the response of a man who had spent 3 years fighting a war and wanted it over, who had no patience for military theater, and who understood that sometimes the most merciful thing is brutal honesty about the reality of a situation.